You're listening to an episode of the Wholistically PsychEd Podcast. I'm your host, Mariah Choate, a nationally certified school psychologist turned stay-at-home mom who now has the freedom to share what school districts don't want you to know. After spending over a decade in the field of education, I ditched burnout and a toxic school district to stay home and raise my babies. But little did I know that less than a year and a half later, I would spend my time creating educational resources for hundreds of parents and educators, all hoping to advocate for children's learning needs when the school gives them the all-too-familiar runaround. Now I'm bringing you the nitty-gritty, behind-the-scenes information and stories that districts don't share, while offering different perspectives from those of us committed to making waves of change. So if you're ready to learn, advocate, and empower yourself, child, or students, pull up a chair or pop your earbuds in. You're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to my very first episode, my journey from burnt out school psychologist to stay-at-home mom advocacy educator. I'm so grateful you're here to listen. All right, today we're diving into a topic that affects so many families and educators, navigating the complexities of special education. After over a decade in both private and public education, from camp counselor to preschool teacher, and finally to school psychologist, I've seen it all. But during my last few years practicing as a school psychologist, I worked in a Title I district and saw toxicity at a whole other level. Burnt out teachers, district higher-ups who wanted parents appeased enough to keep their mouths shut, and districts and admin ignoring clear ethical issues was a daily occurrence. As a school psychologist, my duties were mainly assessing students to see if they qualified for special education services, supporting students' behavioral, social, and emotional needs, and collaborating with parents and teachers to foster clear communication and support. Yet this was challenged every single day. Unfortunately, I witnessed firsthand how school districts capitalize on teachers and parents being misinformed or totally uninformed about special education laws and processes. I saw teacher confusion, frustrated parents, and most importantly, students going without the support they truly deserve, some for years at a time. Navigating the complexities of how to help children who are struggling academically, socially, or developmentally can be incredibly challenging, especially when you're not aware of certain processes and special education laws. And when school districts gatekeep vital information, it creates even more obstacles for parents and teachers. When teachers lack proper training on how to first identify and then support students with disabilities, it creates a perfect storm of neglect. They're overwhelmed with their own responsibilities and often don't know how to spot the signs of learning needs, especially when every student study team meeting ends with continued waiting and having them document the interventions they are implementing. I often found teachers who were either brand new or burnt out were struggling to manage classrooms and student behaviors, while also providing adequate support to students who needed it most. And then there were the parents. Many believed they were receiving support for their children, only to be met with bureaucratic delays and vague responses. I can't count the number of irate parents who came to me desperate for some type of action. They had been told their children would receive help, only to find that interventions were continually postponed, all because they didn't have the magic know-how to request an IEP in writing. I've worked with admin who are incredible and want to know all the things about special education law, just to make sure that they were telling parents and teachers correct information. However, I have also worked with admin who said that they'd been in the field 15 plus years and they knew how to run their school. That a child who hasn't even been assessed for special education yet would do, quote, better in the special day class setting, end quote, even before an assessment plan was signed, and literally taking them by the hand to put them in the class for the day, without parents ever even knowing. Worst of all, I've seen special education teachers, general education teachers, and even admin either putting their hands on a child completely inappropriately and marking it under the term crisis intervention, or doing things that require parent permission, yet the parent never even knew what went on. Whether that's recording the child on their phone or giving them an assessment in a room with other students present, even though it's confidential information. Needless to say, I have story after story after story of my flat-out amazement that people would so blatantly break laws. Until it finally hit me one day. I realized these educators had no clue they were actively breaking laws. They were not well versed on special education in its entirety, and they genuinely thought they were in the right. The problem wasn't just individual teachers, it was systemic. Educators often didn't realize they were breaking laws because they weren't adequately trained. This creates a cycle where uninformed educators lead to uninformed parents, ultimately resulting in fewer services and supports for students. To put it plainly, districts capitalize off of people being uninformed. I say capitalize because at the end of the day, parents and educators who are uninformed about SPED law means lower service costs. By minimizing special education services or using jargon and not fully explaining options, parents agree with whatever the IEP team says, which is likely fewer services. Furthermore, prolonging evaluations or providing less comprehensive ones means less work for the already overwhelming caseloads of psychs and SPED teachers, instead of hiring more people to handle those cases. Obviously, parents unaware of their rights may not pursue legal avenues like mediation or due process. And lastly, less training for educators can ultimately result in fewer support services being provided to students as they are told, quote, how the school does it, end quote, instead of being told what best practice actually is. In my last year as a school psychologist, I was pregnant with my first son and found myself in a challenging Title I elementary school. It was a high foster care population, high child abuse report frequency area, with an ever growing caseload on top of out of compliant IEPs. The environment was toxic, with deep seated issues like racial discrimination. Despite this, I was determined to make a difference. I worked alongside other educators to ensure we looked at students holistically rather than merely labeling them based on behavior. I have to tell you, most of the teachers at this specific school were amazing. People I would trust my own children with, which is saying a lot. However, I quickly discovered that other educators at the same site were focused on keeping students from qualifying for special education services rather than on their actual needs. I'll never forget my first day going to the school. It was August, the beginning of the school year, and I was with the speech pathologist and admin. Admin was communicating to both of us that she'd been sued the previous year by the special education resource teacher due to racial discrimination. She was proud to say that it was unfounded, and yet, still the district chose to keep the two at the same site. Later on, I met the resource teacher myself, and she told me in our first conversation that she refused to be admin's N word. And I remember being completely shocked that this was the type of hateful environment that had been at the school for over 10 years. Needless to say, it didn't take long for me to see laws being broken. By October of that year, I realized this RSP would do just about anything to keep Black and Brown kids from qualifying for special education, even if that meant giving second and third graders preschool academic assessments to make it seem like they were scoring in the average range. She was very vocal about this and even blasted me on email to, yes, the entire district when I would assess a child and find them eligible for services. HR was well aware of these issues for years prior, and per their request, I documented a whole list of SPED laws that were broken by multiple individuals, not just this teacher. And by the end of 2021 to 2022 school year, I gave my resignation letter when HR basically said they just wouldn't do anything about it. It was completely disheartening, to say the least. A few months later, after transitioning to being a stay-at-home mom, I started receiving countless emails, questions, and texts from parents, school counselors, and even teachers. They were all looking for guidance on how to help students and navigate the pushback from the schools. That's when I founded Wholistically PsycEd in August of 2023, about 2 weeks before my second son was born. Since then, I've created practical digital resources to meet the needs and answer the questions I was hearing from so many. As of now, October 2024, I've developed 49 resources and had the privilege of helping over 460 parents and educators. This is when I understood that my story was not unique and unfortunately far too common. I initially started out to help a few people who I'd previously worked with, and it has grown unbelievably more than I ever would have thought, which goes to show how much more of a widespread issue these difficulties are within the school system. I learned early on there's no way I can make lasting change in each of these schools since I'm just one person. However, 460 other parents and educators in 460 other schools in many different cities and states, now that can bring some real change. What sets my approach apart from traditional advocacy work is my focus on equipping parents and teachers who are in the trenches with the correct skills and education they need to advocate and collaborate with schools. Not only that, but my most expensive resource is $40, and it gives you access to my entire Google Drive of resources and any that I add in the future. You don't have to hire an expert and pay them by the hour anymore. You literally become the expert, and you join the community of change makers who are actually taking the power back into their hands. So if you're ready to join us, pop some earbuds in on your drive to work or play it loud while making dinner and become the change you need to see. Thanks so much for joining me today. I would be so grateful if you could share this with anyone you can think of who works in education or happens to have a child with disabilities. If this was helpful for you, make sure to subscribe so you can hear some of the crazy and amazing stories of what is really going on behind the scenes in public education. Until next time, remember, in the famous words of Maya Angelou, each child belongs to all of us, and they bring us a tomorrow in direct relation to the responsibility we have shown to them.